Alrighty, and welcome to our final lesson in Unit 3. This is the demographic transition model. If you took AP Human Geography, you may have come across this before. If not, let's talk about what this is. So, it's a model that tries to explain the difference in birth and death rates in countries as they move from a pre industrial society to an industrialized economy. There's these kind of characteristic changes in the birth and death rate as well as in the population growth rate. So there are four stages. There the pre-industrial stage, the transitional stage where society is becoming industrialized, then the industrial stage, and then the post-industrial stage. And we're going to talk about each of these. So this is a general kind of graphic that just shows you an overall overarching view of what happens during each of these stages. So during the pre-industrial stage, what happens is you have a high birth rate, but since you also have a high death rate, you don't have a very high population growth rate. Population tends to stay stable. Why do you have a high birth rate? Well, because you don't have medical care or you don't have access to family planning, birth control. Could be also that you are living in a rural environment, not in a city where it's an advantage to have a larger family to help out with the farm. And the reason why you have a high death rate is also because of that lack of medical care as well as a limited food supply. Now, as you transition into an industrialized society, you're going to have people. So, by the way, pre industrial is mostly people living in rural areas, farming, that kind of society. Transitional, you have more people moving to urban environments, living in cities. You have increasing quality of medical care, which is going to decrease your death rate. You have an increased food supply, which allows your birth rate to stay high. And because you have a lower death rate and a still high birth rate, you're going to have a high rate of population growth. This is where you're going to see a lot of countries having a large amount of population growth at this stage. And in the industrial stage, you're mostly urban or more urban. You have high quality medical care, which really dramatically decreases your death rate. You also have an unlimited food supply, which decreases your death rate as well. But the birth rate has started to fall, so you don't tend to have high population growth at that point. We're going to talk in future slides about each of these stages and the reasons why the birth and death rates change the way they do. And then finally, in the post-industrial stage, that's where you also will have high quality medical care, a lot of food, and you'll have low death rates and low birth rates. This is where you'll probably reach zero population growth, where your birth rate and your death rate are about the same. So, in a pre-industrial country, what you'll have is an age structure diagram, kind of like this, with the wide base. So you're going to see you can see rapid growth. Why do you have the high birth rate? Well, there's limited access to birth control. You have high infant mortality because of lack of medical care, and this encourages the birth of more children. You're usually having a lot of the society employed in agriculture or manual labor, and then larger families are an advantage because that means you have a larger workforce. And then why do you have a high death rate? Well, the high infant mortality rate, more diseases with less medical care, poor nutrition as well as famine, and not having proper sanitation, meaning trash collection, etc., and poorer levels of hygiene. Now, there are currently no countries in stage one of the demographic transition model, which is a good thing because that means you don't have high death rates. All these countries are industrializing, meaning that they're able to have industry, economics, etc. But all countries before the Industrial Revolution were in the pre-industrial stage. Now, after that, you have the transitional stage where you have the kind of slow growth population. That's the age structure diagram you have with it. And you have a falling death rate because of improved health and sanitation, more food availability, so that's better nutrition, and lower child mortality. Also, there's greater access to education and improved gender equality. If you remember, when women have more rights, there tends to be a decrease in the total fertility rate. So, some of the countries that are in this stage of the transition model are many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Guatemala, Nauru, which is, I believe, an island in the Pacific Ocean, Palestine, Yemen, and Afghanistan. The industrial is going to start having, the industrial stage, you're going to start having a stable population with low growth, and the birth rate is going to fall, just like the death rate fell in the previous stage. And the reasons for this, well, when you're living in the cities, children can't contribute to the family's income because child labor laws. So there's a preference for smaller families because they tend to be cheaper. There's also a lower infant mortality rate, so less incentive to have more children. Improved economic conditions, increases in women's status and education, and access to contraception and family planning all allow for a lower birth rate. So some of the countries that are in this stage are Botswana, Colombia, India, Jamaica, Kenya, Mexico, South Africa, and the United Arab Emirates. The final stage that you are responsible for learning on the AP test is post-industrial. This is where you have both low birth and low death rates, and that causes very low population growth. This is because you tend to have highly educated citizens, healthcare that is sufficient to take care of everybody. More people are moving from rural communities to cities, so there's that disadvantage to having large families. More employment opportunities, especially for women. And some of the countries that are in this stage are Argentina, Australia, Canada, China, Brazil, a large part of Europe, Singapore, South Korea, and the United States. Now, this next part is not on the AP test, but there are newer models that include a stage 5 of the demographic transition model. And there's a thought that a lot of countries are going to end up here where the death rate is going to start in exceeding the birth rate. And so you're going to have a shrinking population. Um, and some of the reasons for the extra low birth rate could be women have financial independence and are choosing to not have children. People are planning for the fact that there might be a lack of resources for future generations. There may be an increase in non-traditional lifestyles where there's less pressure on couples to have children. And some of the countries that are in this stage are Croatia, Estonia, Germany, Greece, Japan, and Portugal. Japan, in particular, is noted for having a shrinking population that has become a big concern for the country's leadership because their population is going to decrease in size, which means they're going to have an aging population without people to support them. So, this is a very complicated graph showing you a lot of information. Let's look at what's important. We've already looked at the different age structure diagrams or population pyramids that go with this, so we're not really going to look at that. Here we're going to look at birth rate, which is this green line at the top, and the death rate, which is this red line. While the birth rate is slightly higher than the death rate, you're going to see an increase in population. But since there's not a lot of difference between the birth rate and the death rate, you're going to not see a very large growth. So this is a stable population. It's not going to be growing very quickly. Now, stage 2, your birth rate stays high, but your death rate falls dramatically. And that is going to cause this exponential increase in the population. In stage 3, your death rate is low, but your birth rate starts to fall as well. But until the birth rate gets very close to the death rate, which you'll see around here, you're still going to have population growth. And then stage 5, if you had a higher death rate than birth rate, that could cause a decrease in the population. So this is actually just showing in a couple of countries a graph of birth rate and the death rate as well as the total population. So for example, in Germany, you can see that they were at probably stage 1 of the demographic transition up to about this point where the death rate starts to fall. Then the birth rate started to fall about here. So here they'd be in stage 1, here stage 2, and then here stage 3 where the birth rate is falling, and then here stage 4 where the birth rate and the death rate are about equal and you don't have population growth. For Sweden, you can see something similar. Looks like they're going to be in stage one around here. And then you're going to see the death rate starting to fall. The birth rate starts to fall around maybe here. So that's around stage two. And then this is stage three, where the birth rate is still falling and the death rate is low. And here's stage four, where they're both low. So you can see that similar trend in all of these countries. Notice there is not data for like this time period for Chile or Mauritius or for China just because those records may not be available. And just a note, developing countries do tend to have higher infant mortality rates and more children in the workforce, which does end up correlating to having a higher total fertility rate and more children. And then for no reason whatsoever, here's me riding a lobster.